I think having watched Adam's presentation, I remain still unsure which side of the fence I'm on. I wrote an article which was published in the September Report magazine. These are just a few slides I literally put together yesterday afternoon to try and stimulate a bit more thought, maybe, and a bit of debate. But I would encourage you to go and read the article. It's a very long, in-depth article. It was published in the September Report magazine. You can access and download that free from the IIMS website. The article and this presentation also is called "The Elephant in the Room: What do remote surveys mean for the surveying profession?" And I think there is a fundamental challenge to surveyors, and I agree with Adam. I think IIMS is well placed to lead some of the education in this area. It's still very new, but I'm quite keen that we should be looking to put some modules together on this particularly interesting subject. So can I just give you a few opening thoughts and comments? I should caveat everything always by saying I'm not a technical man. I've been doing this job now for 7 years. I've learned an awful lot about the industry, but my background is not a technical one. I am, however, and have been very engaged with finding and looking for digital and technological solutions to issues, primarily for the Institute, and some of the things we've done have been quite innovative. So I get it from a digital point of view. I totally understand that this does make sense. But I think the concept is a challenge for many surveyors around the world. And I suppose, if I'm honest, I worry if you are an independent surveyor taking instructions, you're working on your own, and some client says, "I'd like you to do a remote survey," I wonder how you might react to that. It's slightly different if you've got, shall I say, bigger budgets to invest in this kit. The class societies, which we'll look at in a minute, have been very much leading the way. So how do you react as a surveyor? Do you think about changing your whole modus operandi? Is this going to prevent you surveying in a traditional method? Is this the end of traditional marine surveying? No, in my opinion, it certainly isn't. I think remote surveying is definitely an opportunity, but I think it does bring with it some huge challenges. So having said it's a challenge for surveyors, it's also a challenge for some insurance companies too. I've got first-hand knowledge of speaking to some of our UK-based insurers, primarily with small craft in mind. Absolutely remote surveys, in their opinion, and in my opinion, do not work on small craft. You can see applications for big ships and commercial use. It just doesn't fly on small craft, and they are very, very worried. So you need to think carefully. In fact, Adam flagged this up in his presentation about your liability as a surveyor. And I think you need a new set of terms and conditions, or you need something inserted into your terms and conditions, a caveat, in the event that something goes wrong. So the bottom line is, I am still totally unsure which side of the fence I am on. There is evidence on both sides of the fence, but I think Adam has been very fair. And just for example, when you look at the quality of the water there, it's fine, isn't it? But if you go along to do a dive survey and you simply can't see anything, I just wonder about the value of that dive survey to the client. So as I mentioned a moment ago, classification societies have very much been leading the way. Interestingly enough, it had started before COVID came along. Certainly the likes of DNVGL, going back 18 months, were really pushing on and pioneering in this area. But there's no doubt that COVID-19 has become a real key driver. Many surveyors have found it hard to get on board vessels. It's become a tricky process. You've got to go on with a lot more PPE and so on. And I know one or two surveyors who've been slung off ships, and it's a challenging landscape at the moment. So COVID-19 has, in a way, if you like, fueled the increased demand for remote surveys. And some of the majors, and by that I mean the major classification societies, are definitely seeing merit in remote surveying of larger vessels. DNVGL recently put out a press release to say they've now completed 20,000, yes, 20,000 remote surveys over the last 18 months. And as you've seen with Adam, and indeed there are one or two others I know, medium-sized survey companies are designing their own remote templates. But again, how do you as an independent surveyor deal with this? Or do you simply say to a client when someone comes along and says, well, can you do a remote survey? No, that's not what I do. Again, be very, very careful before you start operating outside your area of competency. And again, I wonder about something like cargo loading operations. Is that something that could be handled remotely? I think all of these things are quite challenging questions. I'm not sure all the answers are there yet. So just in the last few months, I picked up these off the internet. Bureau of Veritas completes a remote survey on LNG dual fuel harbour tug Aspen. RENA performs statutory and class surveys remotely. DNVGL's remote surveys surged to 20,000, as I've just said, and Lloyd's Register makes the case for remote surveys. So you can see there's a lot of news stories and press information coming out from these big boys. So there are clearly some advantages to remote surveying if it can be done and be done effectively. There's no need for a surveyor to physically attend a vessel. Now, for many surveyors, I think that is an abhorrent thought. A lot of surveyors like to use their hands, touch, obviously looking, smelling even in an engine room. But it also means no breach of COVID-19 protocols. Obviously, there are cost advantages for the client. There's no surveyor travel expenses to pay. Ultimately, that means that the cost to the vessel operator or owner will become cheap or cheaper. And it's timely, it's easy to perform. But I've also had reports from several people who said that actually doing a remote survey is more time consuming than a traditional one. We run a scheme for ECMID accredited vessel inspectors, the IMCA scheme that we run through Marine Surveying Academy. And OCIMP, who are also in that space, I'm sure you all know the OVID inspections. OVID approved remote surveys or remote audits at the start of the COVID pandemic. And a lot of the OVID inspectors are saying they are taking twice as long to do the survey, and they can't charge twice the amount of money to the client because that just doesn't wash. So I know other evidence than hearsay from people, but if anyone can shed any more light on whether or not doing a remote survey is more time consuming, then I'd be interested to hear. And a remote survey could be appropriate. Here's some examples. The vessel is at sea when damage is sustained. The vessel is at a port, terminal, or location where services of a surveyor are not available. The location is remote, and no other surveys are due at that time on the vessel. A minor statutory finding relates to the verification of documentation or the replacement of spare parts. The condition of Class COC relates to the verification of documentation or the replacement of spare parts. The outstanding documentation can be readily verified using electronic communication. Yes, I can see all of that makes sense. I wouldn't necessarily argue with any of that. If you look at RENA's website, this is what they say. So we've got 3 months tail shaft survey extension, can be done remotely, continuous machinery survey items, documentary verification, management of minor deficiencies, bottom inspection with ship afloat, radio survey, survey for change of name, layout surveys, survey for change of load line, ISMSMC dock audits, and ISPS and ISSC audits. This sort of leads me on to the changing surveyor's tool. I mean, here on the left is perhaps some of the more traditional tools that a surveyor might have, all sorts of bits and pieces. But with remote surveying, the surveyor's toolkit looks rather different. Essentially, it's a smartphone and a laptop and a PC, or perhaps an iPad. It means that you're fundamentally changing the whole way of operating. And that's going to present a challenge, maybe not for the next generation of marine surveyors who come in, but if you're midway through your career as a surveyor and you are forced to go down, not forced, but you choose to go down the route of remote surveys, then your whole toolkit, if you like, is going to change. So what will tomorrow's marine surveyor look like? If this is here to stay, and I agree with Adam, the cat is out of the bag. I don't think there's any doubt that remote surveys after COVID-19 are going to be a permanent fixture, and probably a growing one too. So will the industry be looking for people who come from a different education background? Well, perhaps that's true, possibly. Are they going to be required to have a completely different skill set? Are they going to have an in-depth understanding of IT, maybe? Because let's face it, you're going to be using essentially IT kit. And is there going to be a different route into the profession as a consequence? Well, again, perhaps. No more dirty hands. Some surveyors might say that's a great thing. You haven't got to get your hands dirty. Others, I know, will be shocked, because I know they like to use their hands. They like to run their hands over bits of material and feel, touch and feel. So yes, no more dirty hands for sure. But a surveyor in a remote field is going to become essentially desk-bound behind a screen. I think that is absolutely a given. And for many of what I would call the more traditional surveyors, I can't see them wanting to do that. I don't think that's why they were drawn into the profession. So you may well find that the people who operate remote surveys are slightly different type of creature to what I would call a more traditional marine surveyor. So what about a replacement for practical sea time? Surely there's no way that you could let someone who's not a master or a chief engineer loose on the end of this camera. And I think, again, Adam made a very good point. In the case of the vessels he was seeing, he knew the vessels. They'd overseen the build. They were relatively new vessels. And he had somebody at the other end who knew what they were doing. So what about the guy who's holding the camera? What skills does he need to have? Does he need to have any skills? Again, Adam went back to the diver who was doing the dive survey. You know, his job actually, not as a surveyor, was simply to hold the camera. So is the job of the guy on the vessel simply to hold the camera? And when the surveyor who's doing the remote survey says, put your camera in that hole there because I want to look in there, is that all the guy has to do? Or does he need to have other skills? And how can, as a remote surveyor, how can you be sure that he really is showing exactly what you want to see? It was pleasing to see that Adam was asking for, or his team were asking for evidence. They wanted to see and then take some photos of what they were being shown. And I think that's all extremely positive stuff. So I want to end on just a word of caution. Remote surveying is relatively new. Adam was very honest, I think, in his appraisal when he said, we're learning as we go along. It's not done quite by accident, but they're clearly going to be refining their processes as they develop the procedure. So it's not a finished product, and it is going to be refined as it further develops. Undoubtedly, there will be slip-ups. And it may be that those slip-ups are the things that start to cause people to look differently. I'm not aware yet that there's been anything particularly that's gone wrong with a remote survey. There's certainly nothing appeared yet in a court environment. There's been no litigation at this point. But if you do go down this route, I would really encourage you to make sure you caveat in your report extremely well. There's potential for things to go wrong with remote surveying that you certainly wouldn't see with what I call a traditional survey done in the traditional way, but it's something to be mindful of. So that's all I wanted to say. I don't have answers for you. I hope that gives you a little bit of an overview. I would encourage you, as I said, to do go and read the article. There's a lot more content. It's a 7-page article from memory, so 4,500 words on the subject. And I'd welcome any feedback that you have.